some glorious thing. We can all do nothing, and out of this supposedly inert thing, a dollar, just become a millionaire after a certain period of time. Well, that's not the truth at all. It's not the entire matter. What that would mean we would get $1 million out of the pool of wealth at some point for only having earned $1 in terms of production and therefore contribution to the pool of wealth. Well, that just can't happen. It can only happen in an isolated case at the expense of just reward to all the rest of us. So while we relate to that wrongly as if it's to our advantage, what in fact is happening is, if that could be true, would be to our great disadvantage. But in truth, that saving of the dollar and leaving it there dormant is not even possible under this obfuscation of the currency, because it compels us to produce more and more and more and more and more, and more negligibly as well, which is another thing that's wrong with, purportedly being green. I'm sure that you are green. You're a responsible person. You wouldn't be concerned with this obfuscation of the currency, the fact that it's terminal, the fact that we've had a solution for 40 years, that if the people had just woke up 40 years ago, we wouldn't be here where we are. But the thing is, we can only afford the resolutions, which are objects of the Green Party, if we have a monetary system which can sustain all of the things that we can do and need to do.
Yeah, and even that, I told them last night too that the many of the objects of the Green Party will be met simply by implementing perfect economy, because the pressure that's put on the industries to ever increase their profits under an ever increasing demand for more of their capital to be set aside for servicing the debt means that they don't have to do as much damage to the planet, right, to try and make ends meet, to try and make their loan payments.
Exactly. That's what happens in every case, and even in small shops. The guy mixes some, formaldehyde glue, and what do you do with the excess? You throw it in the trash can instead of, maybe there's a better way to dispose of it so that it doesn't pollute the environment. But we can't afford. The true life cycle of every product is its actual cost, and what we're dealing with is only the initial cost of production, which is not even accounting for the disposal, the proper disposal of all of the expired product that we are producing today, and that's part of the cost of everything. If we really accounted for all these things, the cost of things would be something more to us, not a lot more, but at least some more. The problem is we can't afford to pay that, for proper disposal, or for perhaps somewhat more sophisticated technologies which don't even impose upon us these disposal problems. And that's another reason, that a lot of industry is expatriated. It's not just that the increasing costs in a system that, the United States began a little earlier and subject to the same rates of interest, it would collapse earlier than other systems that might have began at a later date. And what happens nonetheless is, because we have an interdependent commerce, is that seemingly outer systems being dependent upon the survival of the United States actually end up collapsing with it, because the first sector within the United States to go down that sufficiently jeopardizes adjacent dependent sectors brings those down as well, and those bring down all the sectors that are adjacent and dependent upon them. And so this whole thing comes down in the end when sufficient sector of it somehow can no longer survive, upon which enough dependent sectors, their soon ensuing collapse likewise precipitates in a, it's just like the house of cards or the domino trick that you used to play, where, one chip falling over makes, two fall over, which two falling over make four fall over, and the whole thing just escalates like that because we've all been indebted to the limits which we can survive, and therefore deprive the least further income when these adjacent sectors fail and we no longer have their business, we no longer have their payments if they owed us, or those people that we depend on no longer have their business. You see, this is what makes the failure potentially and most probably precipitate in a very escalated fashion.
And that's something that is exactly what Carroll Quigley was talking about in Tragedy and Hope when he talked about this principle of autarky that the world powers started to move toward, where they started to inculcate the economies of their neighboring nations as they move towards, because no nation in this particular day and age can be an end-all be-all. I mean, you need everything. There's things you need from China. There's things you need from Venezuela. So what they would do, though, is in order to make sure that there was that they could sustain this kind of an economy, they need to start grafting in one to the other, back and forth, the reciprocal relationship fashion, some of the politics, and that's why in North America we've seen a shift towards the North American Union and things like that, because they need to do that politically to ensure that they don't lose their economic hegemony. But the problem, as you're saying with that, is that of course when there are problems, they're worse than they would have been if you hadn't have done that.
Yes, and another reason, however, that the ruling elite, so to speak, and I say this in a different manner than the terms are generally used, but the ruling elite are every ostensibly representative government, which in fact, on the contrary, is denying its people representation by not at least debating, in the very least, this proposition of mathematically perfected economy. The reason they aren't debating it is they know that they're wrong, and that they know they have no arguments whatsoever to refute this proposition of mathematically perfected economy. And so these attempts to, implement a North American Union or a European Union and so on and so forth across the world are not truly on the behalf of the people or as a consequence of public mandate, and they're done without public assent, furthermore, which further indicates how they are likely devised crimes against us, and largely revolving around this obfuscation of the currency, which has been perpetrated around the world and which every one of these unions intends to persist in. So, the euro, for instance, wasn't going to save the European Union, but yet these, so-called financial gurus are just, deceivers of the people. Alan Greenspan, for instance, said, it would be good that we had competition between currencies. There's no competition. They're both subject to interest. They both result in the same terminal failure and dispossession of their people. You see,
yeah,
we would immediately prosper approximately 12 times as much just by refinancing our debt under mathematically perfected economy, just by eliminating interest.
And that it makes me think when you talk about Greenspan talking about competition between currencies, the people need to start thinking, why should currencies be competing? Because the currency is just merely that's like the circulatory system of an animal. There's no
there's one circulatory system that does the job right, and anything else, being as the job is done right only by that circulatory system, anything else is a degradation of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't.
They're not mutually interchangeable or compatible even.
That's right. There doesn't need to be any intrinsic value to it. Like, Ron Paul is of course still advocating the gold standard, but there doesn't need to be an intrinsic value assigned to the monetary system, and that can actually be a problem.
Well,
And this,
that's in effect. He boasts that he's an Austrian economist, which isn't to be an economist at all because they're advocates of interest and
mhm.
higher rates of interest, even ostensibly to prevent us from borrowing too much. When of course, on the contrary, the higher the rate of interest, the more you have to reborrow to maintain a vital circulation in the way of interest that you're paying out of circulation. So, in fact, higher rates of interest, so long as we succeed and maintaining a vital circulation only escalate the multiplication of artificial indebtedness and the rate of failure. The models that I provided the Reagan administration, is all the projections that I so carefully proved would come true. What I provided the Reagan administration as I've provided every president since and including Gerald Ford, are mathematic proofs that this system will fail. You see, there's a great difference between just providing an opinion and a mathematic proof that these systems inevitably fail and that there is one and one only solution for the categoric faults that they oppose upon us, this being mathematically perfected economy. So about 1982, when all that I projected the Reagan administration would fail in was obviously becoming true before their very eyes, I thought I'd never hear from the Reagan administration again. Because obviously Reagan was disposed to, this Trojan horse of, tax, decreased federal tax rates, which he actually was going to give most of to his wealthy friends who he represented. So as Reagan was disposed to that singular ambition, pretending he served all of us somehow, without explaining how or proving that in fact these federal tax rates would actually solve price inflation or balance the federal budget. All these disproofs that I provided were coming true, and they called me up one day and they asked me, I was informed that there were people in the administration that were in my camp. They're total believers that I taught the gospel,
Mhm.
and yet the people on the other side were holding their ground by evasion and all, and they wanted me to re-explain a number of points, to elaborate on further questions that they had, and people have done this for forever. There isn't a question that can be asked that I haven't answered before. And of course, I've always been very approachable about this. People ask me how would you finance gold under mathematically perfected economy, and I show them. Anyway, they asked me, if it would be possible to actually calculate the maximum possible lifespan of any economy based on interest-bearing debt, and I said, well, absolutely. And I explained to them exactly how you would do so. So, in turn, I produced, I spent about 6 months of my own time doing an extremely comprehensive job of producing and deploying computer models, which actually all they do is replicate this process of inevitable failure. All they do is borrow back the principal that we pay out of circulation to maintain a vital circulation. They borrow back the interest that we pay out of this circulation to maintain and to maintain a vital circulation, which increases the sum of debt by so much as periodic interest. And furthermore, whatever the circulation is to increase, that's borrowed into circulation as well, further increasing the sum of debt. So basically, that's the process of period by period accumulating whatever further debt is necessary to maintain a targeted circulation under any given rate of circulation. So by borrowing principal and interest back into circulation as a new debt increased above the former sum of debt by so much as periodic interest, and further increasing the debt by however much you're going to increase the circulation, you can actually, period by period, accumulate further indebtedness, and you graph this, and you can see this ever escalating sum of indebtedness, which just so, it's so remarkable how these models exactly projected how much debt we would accumulate, even by projecting what interest rates would be, deployed. And so, I explained how you would do this. I said the only thing you need to tell me is, given such and such circumstances or consequences, how much more you're going to increase the circulation and what interest rates you're going to charge.